It's wonderful to meet you, Mark. Thank you for
You
taking a
too.
minute out today.
I'm glad to do it.
Yeah, so, you got a lot going on as an author, speaker, counselor, relationship specialist, but I want to ask you this. Surviving that pandemic about 4.5, 5 years ago, with all of these capacities, how much of an impact did that time period make, or how many waves were created that you still feel into today?
Oh, I think it was a dramatic shift in our whole culture when we it created so many political divisions. It created so many innovations. Things like Zoom just exploded, of course, and we had to work different ways. We had to interact different ways. And what it also contributed to was what the Surgeon General of the United States said is a pandemic of loneliness, an epidemic of loneliness, that we became more and more isolated, even as we got into more social media, more contact through the online world. People are becoming more and more isolated. And even as we've come out of the pandemic and things have returned to somewhat normal, there is still this sense that we are not connecting, and there is a sense of loneliness more than ever before. And so that's one of the things that I try to address is this sense of loneliness that we have separating ourselves in relationships, even though we have a lot of contacts, we have a lot of interactions, we have a lot of acquaintances, but we're not connecting the way we need in order to be fulfilled in that.
That's the irony of the century is that we have all
Yeah,
these devices. Because when we were kids, there's no way we could have imagined, except for the Jetsons, that there would be video conferencing. Are you kidding me?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's
And
a
then,
whole new world.
yeah, but we still realize that being in a room, exchanging energy particles, being around each other is the most important thing. And maybe that is going to be a saving grace for humanity as we move forward.
Yeah, the more we understand that we're in this together,
Yeah.
that no one makes it through life alone. We try to act like that sometimes, especially those that are introverted. And believe it or not, I'm pretty introverted myself. It's just it is something that we think we want, but we can't function that way. Some people, of course, do need a little bit more isolation. They need some downtime. If you're an introvert, that's perfectly healthy and normal. But we can't live life that way. We are
Yeah.
all in this together. And sometimes, even when we are outgoing in the physical sense, we have a lot of conversations, a lot of contacts. If we've been hurt, we tend to put up barriers in our life, emotional barriers. We tend to put up walls. And so we may interact with a lot of people, but we're actually living in this prison of emotional barriers that we've created for ourselves that creates that same sense of loneliness, even if we're talking to people all day.
So let's put a net around all of these skills that you have and what you do on a daily basis. And to do that, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids. They're
Okay.
third graders. It's career day. And one of the kids in the room is like, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer them?
Basically, I say I'm a writer.
Okay.
And I write about relationships. I write about helping people have healthy relationships in their friendships, in family relationships, and at work. And because I want people to understand, especially if it is a young crowd, I want them to know that there are lots of different kinds of relationships, and they're all important. And they all can be built in the same way. The same basic structures, the same components of love that I teach in my book are what we can put into every area of life. And so, one of the things I want people to understand is that we have the capacity to build these relationships in every area at work, and friendships, and in home relationships, and romantic relationships, in every area. I had a lady that read my book, and she was in her 80s. Her husband had passed on. They had had a wonderful life together, wonderful family, good life. And she read my book, not because she was learning how to have relationships, but because she knew me and she wanted to read my book.
Yeah.
And she came back to me, even though she's had a wonderful life, wonderful family. She said, I wish I'd known these things 50 years ago.
Wow.
Because these are things young people need to know. These are things everyone needs to know because we need healthy relationships. And even if we've come through a healthy family, even if we've grown up in a family that loved us and taught us about love, we probably don't know everything we need to know.
Yeah.
It's so easy to come through a healthy family and think, we know what love is, we know what relationships are. Look at our family. But it doesn't necessarily translate because, every family is kind of quirky. Every family has their own version of weird. and it doesn't necessarily translate to having healthy relationships outside of that family. So that's why I call my book Learning Love, because it is a learning process. So if you put me in front of children, that's what I'm going to try to teach them,
Yeah.
that we can all learn this. This is something that we can learn. It doesn't just happen naturally, it's something that we can learn to do.
So let's go to the beginning of the alphabet here. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What was your ideal life, your dream?
Most of my young life, it was always, no matter what section of life I was in at the time, I always wanted to help people. I always thought that I wanted to do something. When I was really young, I thought about police officer. My dad always wanted me to be a lawyer because he said I could argue well. And then early in my life, I got involved in church work. And so from an early age, I was working in ministry and mission work and things of that nature. And then as I got older, I became a therapist. And so my entire career has had kind of a two-track career as a therapist and also in the theology world and the spirituality world of missions and ministry. And so both of those tracks have kind of always led me into trying to make the world a little better place.
So what was the flashpoint in your life where you realized that you wanted to focus and hone in on relationships? What kind of early seeds were planted into you, and what ultimately was harvested to evolve into this career you have now?
Yeah, like I said, I had a healthy family growing up, great parents that loved me, a lot of good things to say about my family. But one of the things about growing up in a healthy family, as good as that is, sometimes you can grow up a little naive. You
Yeah.
don't know how cruel the world can be and how manipulative people can be, and you're afraid you get a little vulnerable if you go out into the world thinking everything's just going to be like your healthy family. So early in my life, I ended up in a toxic first marriage. It was a terrible experience. Ended in divorce, and in that time is when I started asking questions like, "Is love even possible?" Does it even exist? Maybe it's just a fantasy we all have.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just something that we all want, we pretend like we have, and we have it maybe for a while, but is it really sustainable? And so that's what kind of those kind of questions that kind of haunted me after my divorce were what kind of spurred me on to think a lot about that. And so then, of course, as a counselor, that's what we deal with: relationships with ourselves, relationships with others. And as a theologian, that's what we deal with: relationships with ourselves, relationships with others, relationship with God. And so those questions kept coming into play both in my personal and professional life. And that's what led me eventually to start understanding that love is actually possible, but you have to learn it. You can't just assume it. You have to learn the principles, the components of love, and build those relationships.
You know what blows me away is that, like you said, you had a great upbringing, great family. You got in your first marriage. We all have those moments early on in love. How is it that we are so like fledgling and bad at it in the beginning until we actually have to wake up and look in the mirror? What, how does that happen in your estimation?
Yeah, I think it is. Even if you come from a healthy family, you're just naive because every family that is healthy still functions in their own way. For instance, there are some families that, you know, they just get things out. They don't have really conflicts because if somebody's upset, they let everybody know it, they express it, it's out, it's open, and gets it off their chest, and then they move on. And
Yeah.
that works for them. There are other families that they don't have that kind of relationship. If somebody's upset, they go into their room, they take a few deep breaths. If they have to deal with something, they come back out calmly and have a conversation about it, and that's what works for them. And both those things are healthy relationships. There's nothing wrong with either one as long as it works. You put those two people in a relationship in the same office, working together, or you put those two people as neighbors in a neighborhood, or maybe you put those people in a marriage together, because that kind of stuff happens. There's struggles, there's difficulties, and we have to learn how to deal with those different relationships, even if we come out of healthy families. And what I just described is best case scenario.
Yeah.
Then we're talking about past that, dysfunctional relationships, dysfunctional families, abusive families, toxic families, where you didn't learn the basics, where you didn't have a healthy environment and you didn't have a good example to go by. And you know exactly how cruel and manipulative and hurtful the world can be. You're not naive to that, but you don't know how to have healthy relationships. And so, wherever we come from, whatever our path, we all have things to learn. And unfortunately, when we're young, we're a little cocky. We don't
Yeah.
always know that.
Uh-huh.
It takes a little bit of bad experience sometimes to realize maybe I've got a little bit more to learn, and that's what I hope to help people learn.
Yeah, there's that youthful invincibility where you believe that you know everything. That's the thing. It's
Yeah.
the fallacy of youth. So, who's been that hero, that inspiration for you in your life, both professionally and personally?
Yeah, I've had good fortune to have a lot of those. A lot of people in my family, my parents were high school sweethearts, and so they had a great relationship. Not perfect, of course. I don't want to build it up beyond what it was. It was normal, but it was normal and happy.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate to have seen that. I've seen a lot of people professionally over the years, people that I've known that have worked with me and people I haven't known. There's so many good authors out there. There's so many good professional folks that deal with this idea of what it means to be in relationships. People now like Brene Brown and we have books like the Five Love Languages and things like that that are teaching this. That the informa some information's out there, and I want to contribute to that as well in order to help people have those relationships. But sometimes we just kind of get into what we do. We kind of think we know what we're doing. And sometimes maybe just even the word love is become trivial or something that we just don't want to talk about. Because I met a lady one time, her and her husband, they were probably 70 or so. And she asked me what I did for a living. I said, I'm a writer. And she said, what do you write? I explained about my book, Love and Relationships, Building Healthy Relationships. And she actually rolled her eyes and said, oh. And her husband's sitting beside her. And I don't know what kind of relationship they had, but love and relationships just wasn't what conversation she wanted to have.
Yeah.
And sometimes we've come to that place.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and it's not necessarily later in life, it can be pretty early that we just get frustrated and we think, why bother?
Yeah.
It is what it is. And that's not true. Love is a learned skill set. And so even if we've been down a difficult road and struggled, there are things we can learn that can actually build those relationships no matter where you're starting.
So all of us in our professions kind of stand on the shoulders of giants. There's people that we emulate and learn from. Who would you love to meet and hang out with and talk to, whether in your field or otherwise, that would inspire you and help you on your journey?
Yeah, I think I mentioned Brene Brown. I would love to talk with her and interview her. She has a great way of putting complex ideas about relationships into simple terms that people can relate to. And I think that's a great skill. It's one that I try to have myself when I want to develop, continue to develop in my own life. I would love to talk with her because I think she's the foremost right now in this area of researching, actually looking and digging down into what makes relationships work. She's a great writer. I would love to meet her.
So let me ask you this. You're getting into deep things. Anytime you deal with relationships, whether it's romantically or friendship wise, you're getting into heavy stuff. How do you balance this life of helping people, realize where they're at, help them get to a better place? But you have to evolve as a human. You have a life yourself. How do you
Yeah.
balance that? What's your motivation every day?
Yeah, it's a practice. Everything in love is a practice. I think love is the answer that we have in life to love our family, to love what we do for a living, to love life itself. And that's a practice. We don't ever emerge into it and think, we won. It's not a victory. You don't ever arrive and think, okay, now I'm perfect in love. That doesn't happen. It's all a practice. And so wherever we start, whether we're at a good place in life or not, we can start where we are and continue to practice it. But one of the things that I think is just crucial to all forms of love, and something I really try to practice myself, is the fifth component of love. I teach five components of love in my book. The fifth one is passion, enjoying life. It's this a passion for life, having fun. And I think that's a key ingredient to love that a lot of people forget. There's a practical side. There's a side for dealing with trauma and difficulty. We all know those things exist. But in the midst of dealing with difficulty and hardship, in the midst of the grind of life, if we can remember to have fun, we can remember to enjoy life and look for the things that are fun. The problem with a lot of us, just naturally, is our brains are going to look for what is going to hurt us.
Yeah.
Things that hurt us physically or things that hurt us emotionally, things that offend us. We're going to be on the lookout for that naturally without even trying because our brains are wired up to protect us, to make sure we're okay. Our brain doesn't have to look for fun stuff. It's not going to hurt us to miss something fun. And so we have to train our brains differently. We're naturally going to look out for the bad stuff. Somebody says something that's insulting, we're going to pick right up on that. If somebody's out having saying something fun, laughing, we may ignore that, depending on what kind of day we're having. If we learn how to have fun, uh, it just makes a huge difference in our life, our love, and that's one of the things that motivates me. I try to remember that one every day. Not always successful, but every day that I can remember to look for the good stuff and look to have at least a little bit of fun, it's always a good day.
So, in the realm of relationships, what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
The best advice I have heard, I keep saying her name, Brene Brown has the best advice out there, and that is to understand you have to love yourself before you can love someone else.
Yeah.
You cannot love other people more than you love yourself. One of the things that we fail to understand about love is we tend to think that if I get other people to love me, then it will validate me and then I can love myself. There's a sense of logic to that, but it doesn't work. And the reason for that is love is not a commodity like money. You can't just acquire it. If you need more money, you can ask for a raise at your job. You can take a second job. You can get a loan from a bank, maybe borrow money from a friend. Lots of ways to get money. Love is different. Love is organic. It has to be grown. It can't be acquired somewhere. You have to grow it within you. And so we don't have the capacity to love other people more than we love ourselves. This is something that's been taught for thousands of years. Some of the great teachers, Buddha, Jesus, a lot of great teachers have taught this for centuries. But Brene Brown is the one that researched it and showed it scientifically. She validated scientifically what the great spiritual teachers have been teaching for thousands of years, that it has to start with a love for ourselves in order to love someone else.
So, let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into that young version of you right before you got in that first marriage. And you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've accumulated over this
Mhm.
time. What advice would you impart on that young version of you?
Yeah, what I didn't understand at the time was what I know is so important now, what I just said. You have to love yourself first. I was in that mode as a young person. I was looking to be validated. I didn't understand the depths of love I needed to have for myself in order to love other people. And I just assumed that as long as you did the right thing, people would treat you right. And that's not necessarily true. You have to have boundaries. You have to have enough respect for yourself in order for people to respect you. And I didn't always understand that. I just thought people would respect me if I was a good guy, did the right things, said the right things, that people would respect me and treat me right. That's not how things work. You have to have boundaries. You have to have respect for yourself, and you have to understand the life and the relationships you want to build and work to build those because it doesn't just happen. I've learned that since then. I have a wonderful marriage now in my second marriage. Again, don't want to build it up. It's not perfect, but we have a great, great life together. I often say that I've had a bad marriage and a good marriage, and good is better. We need to work for that. You don't just treat it like, oh, it's natural. As long as we are decent people, it will just work. No, it's something that has to be built. But we can build that. Everybody can.
Yeah, for sure. So, let me ask you this. Of all of these things that you've accomplished and evolved into in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Actually, this book.
Yeah.
This is my first book. I've done a lot of things that kind of led up to the writing of this. But I believe that when we understand love, we understand the five components of love and apply them in every area, it changes lives, it changes families, it changes workplaces. Potentially get enough people, it changes the world. And so it's my proudest accomplishment. It's the thing I'm most excited about to share this book with the world. It comes out in June from Morgan James Publishing in June of 25, available for pre-order prior to that. And it's really the culmination of everything I've done in my life in every area, theologically, through counseling and psychology, in my personal experience. Everything has come together that I can share in this book. And it's really an exciting time.
So, Mark, is the man behind the message, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, everyone that knows you, that absorbs your message, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I see myself as a teacher. That I want people to I like learning. I'm a perpetual learner. I'm always curious. I always have been since I was a child. It's sort of my personality. I'm always curious to learn new things, and then I want to share them. I don't want to just keep them to myself. I'm not just a student. I want to be a teacher as well. I've always seen myself that way and continue to see that. And that's, I think, one of the reasons the book is so exciting because I get to share that with people I may never meet, but I get an opportunity to teach. And if I can share something important that makes a difference in somebody's life, then I think that's the most fulfilling thing in the world.
I'm always astounded that the way that men's brains work and women's brains work, that we even ever come together and collaborate because we're just so vastly different, you know?
It is. There's yeah, there's differences in men and women, and really everybody just has their personality.
Yep.
There's such vast differences between us, but at the end of the day, we all sort of blend together. We all sort of can come together if we learn what love is and how to practice love, then all these differences kind of make up this tapestry of life that we're not in conflict just because we're different.
Yeah.
And I think that's the struggle that we have. We automatically start seeing different as a source of conflict, and it certainly can be, but I don't believe it has to be.
Yeah.
If we start understanding why there are these differences and that everyone has a bit of difference. For instance, some people are very emotional in their relationships, and some people are not. Some people are very reserved. They struggle to show emotion. Both of those are okay, but we need to have emotion. But at the same time, there needs to be a practicality. There needs to be things like commitment, and there needs to be things like making sure the household runs well and make good financial decisions. And you might have heard someone say, I love them, but I can't live with them. That's people that have an emotional connection, but have failed in the area of practicality. They don't live together well. People that are different, somebody's emotional, but somebody else is more practical, can actually build a really great life together because they're balancing those two very important components to live together well, but still practice that emotional connection. And that's just one example of how we are vastly different, but those differences can complement each other if we learn how.
So we've scratched the surface. If anyone wants to dive deeper and pre-order your book, they want to reach out to you, any of the good business in your world, where can they go?
It's my website. It's markahicks.com. Make sure to get my middle initial in there. Hicks is Hicks, markahicks.com. You can find my book, the links there to Barnes& and Noble and Amazon in order to pre-order my book prior to June 25, and then it will be available wherever books are sold. I also have a free ebook on my website that is The Five Components of Love. And so you get a brief overview. The book goes much deeper, obviously, but a brief overview of those five components is available for free on my website. I also have a contact form. I'm available for speaking engagements and workshops and coaching. Or if your audience just wants to say hi, I would love for them to let me know that they saw me on your show. So use my contact form and let me know how I can be of service.
Excellent, Mark. What great work you're doing. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. Best of luck while in the book release.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.